So let's get started. Welcome to choosing, using, and studying with multiple Bible versions. Now, the first topic is the challenge of studying with multiple Bible versions. Inside Logos alone, there are so many Bible translations. It can be overwhelming. And some of you may just say, that's too much. I've got my favorite Bible. I'm going to stick with that. And that's okay to do. But having access to this many translations can be a wonderful way to study and can be a great help in studying as well. So recognize that first we've got a multitude of English Bibles to choose from. Now, there are different types of English Bibles, as we're going to show you in a moment. There are different translating rules that were used in making the English Bibles. And there are different translating teams and goals for the intended audience. There are also different manuscript uses and choices. In other words, when the translating team was getting together and they were looking at the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts, some teams had more and some had less access, and that can directly affect the decisions in the translation process. Now, let's go ahead and open up the personal book, and let's take you to some of these pieces of information. So the first thing I want to do is show you how you can discover instantly the various English Bible translations you have in your Logos library. So if you would, go to the top menu, one of those three big icons, and click the book icon, the library icon. Now I'm going to show you a little trick here. If you left click on the book icon and just drag it down, you'll see it will cover kind of a colored space. And I'm going to cover the left side of my layout. And I'm going to release that icon. So just left click and drag and release. Now, what we're going to do is type in a special command inside the find box. And here it is, type :Bible. Notice there's no space, type :Bible, space, subject : quote, Bible. Now that looks like a line, but really it is just two minus signs. So dash, dash, English, quote. Now, based on the library collection that you have and the various Bibles you've purchased, you will get a list of all the English Bibles that you have in your Logos library. And you'll be pretty shocked on the variety of translations that you have. And we're going to go into the various types of Bibles in a moment, but I wanted to give you this nice little tip so you can see right away the various English Bibles you have. Now, let's talk about the different types of English Bibles. First, I want to start with the Lexham series. Now, the first one is a Hebrew interlinear. Very important. Notice the first word, Hebrew interlinear. That means the Hebrew is going to be the predominant text, and then the English will be underneath it. So if we look at Genesis 1:1, we can see the Hebrew at the top, and we can see the English towards the bottom. Now, this is interesting because if you read the English, it sounds kind of wooden and even somewhat out of order. God, he created in the beginning of the earth and of the heaven and the earth. Okay, we'll go to a different passage down below here. Let's just pick another one. In fact, let's do the 10 Commandments. So I'm going to go to Exodus 23. So it says, name Yahweh, lift up, not for vanity, God you. So do you see how it's leading with the Hebrew and underneath it is the English? Okay, so we come to the Greek interlinear. Notice again the Greek's at the top, and we have the English below. And I'll take Romans 4:5, for example. And look how it reads in English. To thee but one who does not work, who believes, but in the one who justifies, the ungodly is credited, faith his righteousness. As you can see, we're actually seeing the Greek word order with the literal English translation underneath it. And that can be very difficult to read. And we also have one for the Septuagint. Now, this is the most literal English Bible you'll have because it literally is word orders based on the original language. One of the incredible inventions that Logos brings is the English reverse interlinear. Let me demonstrate. If we actually turn on the Greek, which I'll go ahead and do, we see that the English is on the top and the Greek below it is following the English word order. And that's what these little numbers are for. The 1 and the 2 show you the exact Greek order or Hebrew word order. Now we can read Romans 4:5 much more easily. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. So you can see the English is easier to read. Now, what are the types of English Bibles? On the one extreme, there are the literal word-for-word formal. And as I said just a moment ago, the interlinear is the most literal because here's the Greek and Hebrew word and there's the corresponding English word. But it's very difficult to read. So the next would be this word for word. And we'll show you some translations in a minute. But this would be something like a New American Standard or King James. You're not going to see too many words inserted in addition to the text. In other words, there's going to be a one-to-one correspondence between the English and the Greek. On occasion, you'll see these little arrows underneath the English words, and that's to help us smooth out the English based on the original language. So this, for example, word toe really is one Greek word, but it's all combining this idea to the one who. Pretty cool. All right, so that's the idea behind that. Now, the second other extreme, or the other end of the translation types, is the dynamic. It's thought for thought. It's functional. And this would be an example of the NIV. So let's take the NIV, and we'll just open that up real briefly. And we'll show you some more examples in a moment here. But here's the NIV. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Do you see how this is a little bit smoother? It's a little bit clearer, and it's capturing the key thoughts of the text. Now, this can be much easier to read, and it's great for devotionals, but it's not as literal. Now, the third type is a paraphrase, and probably the most familiar of all of these paraphrases would be the Message. Certainly, the New Living Translation would be another one. Now, to show you how this one works, here it goes. Now, in this particular case, Romans 4 and Romans 5 have been mixed together, but I'll jump down to verse 5 here. It says, "But if you see the job is too big for you, that it's something only God can do, and you trust Him to do it, you could never do it for yourself no matter how hard and long you worked. Well, that trusting Him to do it is what gets you set right with God by God's sheer gift." So you can see this is a complete paraphrase of the word for word and thought for thought. Now let me show you a picture to help really capture this idea. This is found in one of these journals, and you can see here on the far left the NASB King James on the more formal side. Okay, so these are much more literal. Then as we move to the right, we get this more functional or this more dynamic. And you can see the NIV is kind of in the middle, and in the extreme, the New Living Translation, New Century Version. In fact, let me open up the New Living Translation. "But people are counted as righteous, not because of their work, but because of their faith in God who forgives sinners." So you can see how that is more dynamic, bordering the paraphrase. Another link that's really helpful visually to see this, and I'll bring it into the space here, is this translation comparison chart. And I have the link inside the personal book for you. So you can see the interlinear on the far, word by word, and you can see the various translations as we move from the word for word to thought for thought, and you can see that clearly there. So pretty cool, and you can see another English Bible translation comparison list here on a graph, and even have some, if you scroll down below, some examples of how it goes from word for word to paraphrase. Very helpful to be aware of these. Now, this is why some translations are your favorite and different to others based on what you prefer when you read the Bible. So with that being said, I would bring forth this suggestion. When you're studying, try to use the literal word-for-word translations as much as possible. This just makes it easier to work with the original language. If you're going to do devotional where you're sitting back and you're relaxing, you just want to enjoy the word, but still make sure it's an accurate understanding, that's where the dynamic comes in handy, like the NIV. When it comes to memorizing, I would just choose the one that's the most familiar, the easiest to memorize, and the one that has the fewest words. That is, less to memorize. So just some thoughts as you think about using different Bible translations. And as we talked about those different examples, we've covered all those. I should mention one other issue, and that is the TNIV, or the gender neutral translation. This is a big deal. Now, it depends on what passage you're looking at, but here's how it reads. Notice it says, however, in fact, let me put these side by side. That probably is the best way to compare these translations. And let me turn off the Greek so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay, now the gender-neutral translations are trying to get rid of the he's and the she's and just make it more generic, more general. So for example, but to the one who does not work but believes in him, personal pronoun masculine, who justifies the ungodly, his faith is credited as righteousness. Now if we come over to the gender-neutral translation, however, to anyone who does not work, notice the anyone versus the one, does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness. Notice that his faith has been changed to their faith. Now that's not a big deal if you understand what's going on, but this can take a whole new life of its own, especially when you get into messianic texts, where it's been stripped of the masculine and it becomes very difficult to see where Christ is being talked about. We may cover that later if we have time. Next is the recommended but not required resources. Now let me go ahead and close these down and make you aware of some really neat resources. First, all of you should have an English Bible versions timeline. So if you go to library and literally type in English Bible timeline, you'll see this little book here, English Bible Versions Timeline. And this literally will show you each Bible translation as it got created. Pretty cool. Now I'm kind of maximizing this so you can see this, but you see here Wycliffe's translation, then Tyndale's translation, then Coverdale, and you can see the years go through here. This is a fascinating view of history, so you can see when each of the translations were created. And it goes all the way up to 2005, the TNIV. So obviously there's more that have come out since then. Unfortunately, Logos has not updated it. So be aware of that. It's a nice handy list to have. The next one is in your timeline. So we're going to go to Tools, and we're going to go to Timeline. So Tools, Timeline. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in this phrase, Bible is published. I'm going to put that over here at the right. Go ahead and put that in there and then maximize. And then I recommend clicking on Fit, Show All Matching Events. Now you can see in the timeline tool the same information we saw in the other tool. Here you go. So we start off with the Great Bibles published, then the Coverdale, and so forth. There's the Gutenberg Bibles published, the Bishop's Bible, and you can see all these translations in here, and you can scroll down all the way, and let's see how far this one goes till, I think it's 2012. Pretty neat that you can see all these in here. So very, very helpful. You can also type Bible, and that'll get you more items in the timeline, but then you'll get other items as well. So just be aware of that. I was just trying to give you a search to get you going. Okay, so that's the timeline tool. And then let me talk about several key resources. This first one is by Leland Ryken. It's called The Word of God in English. And if you want to learn where our Bible came from and how it came about, and this can be very important from an apologetic standpoint. You know, the unbelievers in our world distrust the Bible. They see it as a man's work. They don't see it as something from God. They see it from men. And there's always this attack on the heirs and the trustworthiness. And it's important that you know where our Bible came from and the manuscripts and how much evidence we really have on the authenticity of the Bible. The Bible we're reading today, a good translation, is extremely precise and authentic to the original manuscripts. Now, when I say original manuscripts, that means the actual text that Paul wrote or Moses wrote. We don't have any of those. We just have copies of copies. Now, to show you how significant it is, the New Testament, for example, we have literally thousands of copies of the New Testament, pieces and parts, and all within 100 years of Paul, for example. Now, Homer, who wrote the Iliad and Odyssey, no one ever challenges that Homer is the author. Yet there's literally 1,500 years between the life of Homer and our first copy. So if the secular world's going to embrace Homer with such few copies and a huge time gap between the author and the first copy, then they have to, by default, accept Paul's texts and so forth. So you can learn about those things in these types of books. Now, along the same line is Philip Comfort's The Complete Guide to the Bible. And again, this is going to do the same thing, also talking about the Old Testament and so forth, and talk about the translations and even compare some of the modern translations and talk about children's Bibles. Then we have Neil Lightfoot, who actually teaches us how we got our Bible. This can be a little more information, a little more technical, get into the various manuscript sources and so forth. And then if you want something very technical, but still understandable and accessible, is Stanley Porter's How We Got the New Testament. The text, the transmission, and the translation. Very important information that'll arm you in any kind of apologetic situation. Very, very important books to have in your library. Also, Logos has created a mobile ed course. There's a 4-course bundle, and I've given you that link there. Also, there's a pre-pub for an early Bible translation collection. There's 15 early Bible translations you can get with Logos in the community pricing. Let me go ahead and bring that in. Here it is. Just do a search for early Bible translation. There's 15 volumes, and there's some of the significant, very early translations. Pretty neat. Again, this won't completely give you all the Bible translation, but it can be a wonderful addition to your library. Okay. The next one is a simple search that can give you more information about how we got our Bible without going and buying new books. So here's the search. We're going to go to search, then we're going to go to basic search, and I recommend you search all resources. And just search on the phrase, in quotes, how we got our Bible. And this will find, depending on the number of books in your library, several places in various books on this topic, how we got our Bible. You'll find these in commentaries, you'll find these in New Testament, Old Testament introductions. Nevertheless, it's a great way to just learn more about how we got our Bible with existing resources you already have in your library. So it's a wonderful search to run. Now, the next section is number 4. How do you organize your library with all these collections? And I do recommend doing this particular setup. So let's do a couple of these together, and I'll put a couple of these on the Faith Life. So if you go to faithlife.com and search for Learn Logos, you can get access to what I'm about to post in a few moments. So let's first start with the collection tool. Let's go to Tools, and let's go to Collections. Now, the first one we're going to do, and I've already got this created, so I'm just going to go ahead and open this up. And I'm going to go to Bibles, and you can see all the ones I've created. I've got Bibles, all of them, my apparatus Bibles, my comparison Bibles that I use for comparing translations, my English Bibles, some of my key favorite Bibles, my foreign translation Bibles. That would be, for example, German or something along those lines. My Greek Bibles, my Hebrew Bibles, my interlinear and reverse interlinear Bibles, my Latin Bibles, my study Bibles, and even my textual notes Bibles. So there's a lot of collections you can create. Now let's do the first one together because pretty much they all follow the same rule after that. So let's just do the Bibles, English as our first collection, and I'm going to